For most animals, birth is the beginning of independence. A foal stands within an hour. A newborn antelope can run before the sun sets. Many mammals can cling, crawl, or follow almost immediately. Survival begins at once. The human infant does none of these things. It cannot stand, cannot feed itself, cannot even lift its own head with control. It will remain dependent not for days, but for years. In evolutionary terms, such helplessness should have been a weakness too costly to keep. Yet it was not removed. It was preserved. Why did natural selection allow our species to become the one that needs care longer than any other? The helplessness of a human infant is not a small difference. It is a biological extreme. In open grasslands where early humans lived, vulnerability was visible from far away. Predators could detect weakness. Harsh weather could turn quickly. Food was never guaranteed. In that environment, a newborn who could not cling tightly, could not move independently, and could not regulate its own temperature would seem unlikely to survive. Many mammals give birth to young that are neurologically mature enough to stand or at least grip their mothers within minutes. Human infants cannot even focus their eyes clearly at first. Their muscles are soft, their skull bones still separated, their nervous system unfinished. From a purely immediate survival perspective, this appears inefficient. Yet early Homo sapiens did not evolve in isolation from these dangers. They evolved within them. Archaeological evidence from Pleistocene sites shows communal living spaces, shared hearths, and overlapping generations coexisting in close quarters. Fossilized footprints preserved in ancient sediments suggest that adults and children moved together across landscapes. Care was not an accident. It was structured into the daily rhythm of life. The extended helplessness of human infants coincides with another unusual trait, an exceptionally large brain relative to body size. Compared to other primates, humans give birth at a stage when the brain is only about a quarter of its eventual adult volume. In chimpanzees, that proportion is much higher at birth. This means a human newborn is neurologically unfinished. The brain continues to grow rapidly outside the womb, forming billions of neural connections in response to the surrounding world. In evolutionary biology, this pattern is sometimes described as secondary altriciality. The infant is born early, developmentally speaking, because the mother's pelvis, shaped by upright walking, cannot accommodate a fully developed brain at birth. Bipedal locomotion narrowed the birth canal long before our brains reached their modern size. This anatomical compromise forced a shift. Rather than completing development internally, human infants complete much of it externally, in constant interaction with caregivers. Every touch, sound, and facial expression becomes part of neural construction. The long period of care is not only protection, it is a continuation of gestation in social form. Fossil pelvis structures from early Homo species show this tension between locomotion and childbirth clearly. As upright walking stabilized millions of years ago, childbirth became more complex. The solution was not to shrink the brain, but to deliver it earlier. That decision, if we can call it one, created a dependency that required cooperation. Unlike solitary mammals, early human groups relied on shared caregiving. Anthropological studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, often used as partial models for ancestral patterns, show that infants are passed among multiple adults throughout the day. Grandparents, siblings, and unrelated group members contribute. The survival of a helpless infant becomes a collective investment. The need for care, therefore, is not only biological but structural. It shaped how humans organized themselves in space and time. Villages formed, roles emerged. Generations overlapped intentionally. The extended childhood that feels natural to us today began as an adaptive response to anatomical and neurological expansion. It required stability in social bonds. It required memory across generations. It required patience measured not in weeks but in years. When compared to other animals, the difference is not merely duration. It is the integration of vulnerability into the architecture of the species. The human body begins life incomplete, expecting the presence of others. That expectation is written into our bones, our brains, and our earliest archaeological traces. If extended helplessness were only a consequence of narrow pelvises and large brains, it would still be a burden. What transformed it into an advantage was time. Human development unfolds slowly not only because of anatomy, but because the brain requires prolonged exposure to environment in order to specialize. At birth, many neural circuits are only loosely organized. The infant brain produces an excess of synaptic connections, far more than it will eventually keep. Through repeated sensory input, social interaction, and movement, some of those connections are strengthened while others are pruned away. This process cannot be rushed. In most mammals, behaviors essential for survival are largely pre-programmed. A newborn deer does not need to learn how to run. It needs only the strength to stand. A young sea turtle does not require instruction to move toward the ocean. Its nervous system guides it immediately. Humans are different. Very few complex behaviors are fully prepared at birth. Language, tool use, social norms, and cooperative hunting all require years of observation and imitation. The long period of care provides the protected time necessary for this slow construction. Archaeological layers from sites associated with early Homo sapiens show increasing complexity in stone tools over tens of thousands of years. Tool-making techniques required precision, memory, and intergenerational teaching. Such skills cannot be encoded genetically in full detail. They must be learned. A short childhood would not allow sufficient time for mastery. The human body therefore remains dependent while the brain accumulates patterns from its surroundings. In evolutionary terms, this extended learning window allowed flexibility. When climate shifted during the Pleistocene, when landscapes dried or cooled, when prey species migrated, humans adapted behaviorally rather than anatomically. Cultural transmission became a survival tool. A prolonged childhood increased the capacity for cultural inheritance. Evidence of symbolic artifacts, beads, ochre markings, carved figures, suggests that social communication expanded beyond immediate survival tasks. These expressions require shared meaning, something only possible when individuals spend long periods immersed in group life. The structure of human populations also reflects this slow development. Skeletal remains from various prehistoric sites indicate overlapping generations living simultaneously. Unlike many animals that reproduce quickly and die young, humans extended both childhood and adulthood. The presence of older individuals, including post-reproductive adults, created stable networks of knowledge. Children growing slowly within these networks could absorb accumulated experience. From a biological standpoint, slow maturation delays reproductive age. This might appear disadvantageous compared to species that reproduce rapidly. Yet in humans, delayed reproduction correlates with higher offspring survival when supported by group cooperation. The need for prolonged care therefore intertwined with demographic structure. A long dependency period required adults who could provide sustained resources. It also encouraged bonding patterns that favored pair stability and kin alliances. When viewed across evolutionary time, the helpless infant is not an anomaly but part of a broader system. The body remains incomplete so that the brain may remain adaptable. The environment becomes an extension of developmental biology. Human childhood stretches outward, shaped by climate, geography, and community. Compared to other animals, the difference is not simply weakness at birth. It is the transformation of weakness into a platform for learning. The cost was years of vulnerability. The return was behavioral flexibility unmatched among terrestrial mammals. Extended dependency also reshaped the physical body beyond the brain. A human infant is born with limited motor control, weak neck muscles, and immature coordination. Even digestion is gradual in its development. The first months of life are marked by constant regulation from outside sources. Warmth from another body, milk supplied directly, rhythmic movement that calms the nervous system. Many mammals regulate these functions independently within hours. Human infants rely on contact to stabilize heart rate, breathing patterns, and temperature. This biological fragility suggests that survival depended not merely on parental presence, but on consistent proximity. In ancestral environments where nights were cold and predators moved silently, physical closeness was protection. The need for sustained holding and carrying likely influenced skeletal and muscular adaptations in adults as well. Fossil evidence indicates that early human forelimbs retained strength and flexibility suitable for lifting and transport, even as lower limbs specialized for upright walking. The human hand, capable of both fine manipulation and firm grip, became not only a tool for crafting objects but also a means of carrying young over long distances. Archaeological findings of wear patterns on ancient teeth suggest that adults sometimes used their mouths as auxiliary tools while hands supported infants. Care was physically integrated into daily labor. This continuous contact also shaped the emotional architecture of the species. Studies in developmental biology demonstrate that human infants produce signals, crying, facial expressions, vocalizations that are especially effective at eliciting adult attention. These signals activate caregiving responses in the human brain, mediated by hormonal systems such as oxytocin and prolactin. While many mammals exhibit maternal bonding, the intensity and duration of human attachment is unusually prolonged. The infant's helplessness sustains this bond across years, not months. From an evolutionary perspective, this extended attachment reinforces group cohesion. When a community invests time and energy in raising its youngest members, relationships deepen across generations. The long period of care may therefore have strengthened social memory. Burial sites from Upper Paleolithic contexts sometimes include grave goods associated with children, suggesting recognition of individual identity even at young ages. Such treatment implies emotional investment that extended beyond immediate survival utility. Compared to other animals, where offspring disperse quickly or mature rapidly, humans built environments where immaturity was expected and protected. Seasonal cycles, migration routes, and food gathering strategies would have been organized with children in mind. The pace of movement likely adjusted to accommodate shorter strides. Fire hearths offered safe centers around which infants could remain while adults worked nearby. The need for care shaped spatial patterns of settlement. Over time, these patterns stabilized into traditions. The human body begins life unable to function alone because it evolved within a system that assumed shared responsibility. Dependence was not an error to correct, but a condition to support. Other animals rely more heavily on instinctual independence. Humans rely on constructed environments and sustained relationships. The biological incompleteness at birth is mirrored by the social completeness required for survival. In this way, the need for care extends beyond infancy. It becomes a defining feature of the species structure, embedded in muscle, bone, hormone, and memory. If prolonged care shaped the beginning of human life, it also influenced how childhood itself became a distinct stage rather than a brief transition. In many animal species, the line between infancy and adulthood is narrow. Growth is rapid. Within a short span of months, the young individual reaches physical maturity and begins independent foraging or hunting. In early human populations, this boundary stretched outward. Skeletal analysis from prehistoric remains shows that human growth plates close later than in other primates. The adolescent growth spurt, particularly pronounced in Homo sapiens, represents a delayed surge of physical development after many years of gradual change. This extended period between birth and full maturity created something unusual in evolutionary history, a long middle phase in which individuals were neither helpless infants nor self-sufficient adults. This phase required continued guidance. Evidence from hunter-gatherer societies suggests that children participated in tasks appropriate to their strength and understanding, but they remained under supervision for many years. Learning to track animals, identify edible plants, or construct shelters involved observation long before direct responsibility. Compared to other mammals whose young often practice essential survival behaviors almost immediately, human children accumulate skill through imitation across a decade or more. The environment of early Homo sapiens demanded such complexity. Shifting climates during the Pleistocene produced varied ecosystems, grasslands, forests, coastal zones, each requiring different adaptive strategies. A short childhood would not have allowed mastery of such diversity. The archaeological record reflects this gradual competence. Stone tools from different periods show refinement not just in sharpness, but in standardized design, implying instruction and shared technique. These tools were not instinctively reproduced, they were taught. Teaching requires time, patience, and stable social bonds. The need for prolonged care thus expanded beyond infancy into an organized system of apprenticeship. From a biological perspective, this extended childhood correlates with the slow maturation of the human prefrontal cortex, the region associated with planning, impulse control, and social judgment. Neurodevelopmental studies indicate that this area continues maturing into the third decade of life. While the early years are marked by rapid synaptic growth, adolescence involves continued pruning and refinement. The brain remains adaptable, but it also remains dependent on environmental input. Compared to other animals, whose neural circuits for survival tasks stabilize quickly, humans delay full cognitive independence. This delay increases vulnerability but also increases capacity for cooperation and long-term planning. Fossilized remains of early human communities suggest that adolescents were integrated into group life without immediate reproductive pressure. Reproductive age in humans arrives later than in many mammals of similar body size. This delay allows individuals to acquire social knowledge before contributing offspring. Demographically, this structure reduces rapid population turnover and strengthens generational overlap. The long childhood becomes part of a broader temporal architecture in which experience accumulates before reproduction. Such a pattern is rare in the animal kingdom. The need for care extends into adolescence because development itself is staged over extended time. The human body grows slowly, the brain organizes gradually, and social roles emerge through guided participation. Compared to other animals, where maturity follows swiftly after weaning, humans constructed a life history in which growth is measured in years rather than seasons. The dependence of early life, therefore, expands into a deliberate pacing of development. It is not only infants who require care, but children whose bodies and minds are still forming within a cooperative framework. The length of human childhood cannot be understood only by looking at bones and brains. It must also be viewed through the structure of generations living together across time. In many animal populations, generational overlap is brief. Parents reproduce quickly, offspring mature rapidly, and life expectancy is often short. In contrast, archaeological and demographic evidence suggests that early human groups contain children, reproductive adults, and older individuals simultaneously for extended periods. This layered population structure created a stable environment in which prolonged care could function without collapsing the group's productivity. Fossil assemblages from Upper Paleolithic sites reveal individuals who survived into older adulthood, some showing signs of healed injuries or tooth loss that would have required assistance. The presence of older adults implies sustained support networks. When older individuals remain within a group beyond their reproductive years, they contribute experience rather than direct offspring production. Anthropologists sometimes describe this pattern as cooperative breeding combined with grandparental investment. In humans, the survival of children correlates strongly with the presence of additional caregivers beyond the biological mother. Compared to other mammals, where maternal care alone is often sufficient because offspring mature quickly, humans distribute responsibility. This distribution allows childhood to extend without overwhelming a single caregiver. The energy demands of raising a slow-developing child are substantial. Human infants require frequent feeding, protection from environmental extremes, and constant monitoring. As children grow, their caloric needs increase while their productive capacity remains limited for many years. In a solitary system, such dependency would strain survival. In a cooperative group, however, labor can be divided. Archaeological evidence of shared hearths, communal food processing areas, and structured living spaces suggests that early humans organized their environments to support collective resource management. The slow maturation of children fits within this structure. From a demographic perspective, delayed maturity also affects population growth rates. Species that reproduce quickly often experience boom and bust cycles tied to resource availability. Humans, with longer intervals between births and extended juvenile periods, tend towards slower population growth under natural conditions. This pacing may have reduced competition within groups and allowed more consistent investment per child. Compared to animals that produce large litters with limited individual care, humans invest heavily in fewer offspring. This strategy aligns with what evolutionary biologists describe as a shift toward quality over quantity in reproductive patterns. The extended need for care becomes part of a life history strategy in which survival depends on knowledge transfer and social cohesion rather than rapid reproduction. Skeletal evidence from juvenile remains also shows that growth rates can vary based on nutritional conditions. This flexibility indicates that childhood is not a fixed biological countdown but responsive to environmental stability. In periods of scarcity, development may slow. In stable periods, growth accelerates. Such responsiveness requires buffering mechanisms, including food sharing and protective social structures. Compared to other animals whose growth trajectories are more rigid, humans demonstrate developmental plasticity. This plasticity is sustained by caregiving systems that absorb environmental fluctuations. The extended period before full maturity allows individuals to adapt to local conditions, languages, and customs unique to their community. Over evolutionary time, this adaptability may have strengthened group identity and cultural continuity. The need for care thus intersects with population stability, resource distribution, and intergenerational memory. Childhood persists not merely because the brain grows slowly, but because the social framework supports slow growth. Without overlapping generations capable of sustaining dependence, prolonged immaturity would not endure. In the human case, demographic structure and biological development co-evolved. Compared to other animals, the difference lies not only in the helpless infant or the curious child, but in the multi-generational network that surrounds them. The requirement for care is embedded in a population design that values sustained presence over rapid turnover, continuity over immediacy. In this structure, time itself becomes a resource invested into each new life. The slow unfolding of human development also reshaped how time itself was experienced within early communities. In many animal species, life is organized around immediate survival cycles, feeding, avoiding predators, reproducing, and repeating the pattern within a short span. In contrast, the extended dependency of human children required anticipation far beyond the present moment. Adults had to gather not only for today's hunger, but for months and years of sustained support. This forward orientation altered the rhythm of group life. Archaeological evidence from seasonal campsites suggests that early humans returned repeatedly to familiar locations, building predictable patterns around migration routes and resource availability. Such repetition would have allowed children to grow within relatively stable landscapes rather than constantly shifting territories. Stability, even if temporary, gave developing minds consistent cues from which to learn. Compared to animals whose offspring mature quickly and disperse, human groups cultivated continuity in space and time. This continuity reinforced the expectation that a child would remain within the social field long enough to absorb its patterns. The human face itself carries signs of this extended development. Compared to other primates, human juveniles retain certain infant-like features, rounded skulls, flatter faces for a longer portion of growth. Biologists describe aspects of this as neoteny, the retention of juvenile traits into later stages. Such features may have reinforced caregiving responses in adults, sustaining protective behavior beyond infancy. The body, therefore, did not merely tolerate prolonged care, it signaled for it. Vocal development also reflects this long timeline. Human speech emerges gradually through years of interaction. Unlike many animal calls that are largely innate, language acquisition depends on immersion within a speaking community. This immersion is only possible when children remain close to adults for extended periods. Fossil evidence cannot preserve spoken words, yet the anatomical changes in the human vocal tract and the neurological specialization for language imply that speech evolved alongside long childhood. A short juvenile phase would not allow mastery of complex grammar or shared symbolic systems. The need for care thus intersects with communication itself. Compared to other animals, whose survival behaviors rely heavily on instinct, humans rely on instruction and shared meaning. The extended period of learning becomes a bridge between biological birth and cultural participation. Environmental pressures during glacial and interglacial cycles likely intensified this requirement. As climates shifted, knowledge of seasonal variation, animal migration, and edible plant cycles became crucial. Children observing adults over many seasons would internalize patterns invisible within a single year. Time stretched across generations, and childhood stretched within that temporal field. The presence of ritual objects in certain archaeological contexts suggests that children were integrated into symbolic traditions gradually. Participation in ceremonies or communal gatherings would have required years of observation before full involvement. Compared to animals that reach reproductive maturity quickly and assume adult roles almost immediately, humans staged responsibility slowly. Adolescents learned social boundaries, kinship roles, and cooperative norms over extended durations. The need for care extended into moral instruction and group identity. The slow pace of maturation, therefore, cannot be separated from the emergence of complex social systems. The human child grows within a temporal structure that assumes continuity of place, of memory, of shared practice. Without such continuity, prolonged dependency would be too costly. Instead, it became an investment in long-term cohesion. Compared to other animals, the human difference lies not only in vulnerability at birth, but in the deliberate stretching of development across years shaped by shared time. The body grows slowly because it evolved within a world where survival depended on accumulated seasons rather than immediate independence. Human dependence does not end with childhood. The same biological and social architecture that supports a slow beginning also extends vulnerability into later stages of life. Compared to many animals, humans experience an unusually long lifespan, often decades beyond reproductive years. This longevity introduces another dimension to the question of care. In species where adulthood is brief and death follows closely after reproduction, there is little evolutionary incentive to maintain complex caregiving systems beyond infancy. In humans, however, individuals frequently live long enough to require assistance once more in old age. The need for care, therefore, appears at both ends of the life course, creating a symmetrical pattern of dependency. Skeletal remains from prehistoric contexts reveal individuals who survived injuries that would have been fatal without group support. Healed fractures, signs of chronic conditions, and advanced tooth wear suggest prolonged survival despite physical limitation. These traces imply that care was not restricted to children. It extended to adults who could no longer hunt effectively or travel long distances. Such continuity reinforces the idea that human survival depended on cooperative networks sustained across decades. When early human groups supported both the very young and the aging, they created a social structure distinct from most mammals. Compared to other animals, whose injured or weakened members often perish quickly, humans maintained extended protection for vulnerable individuals. This pattern intersects with cognitive development. The same slow maturation that requires years of guidance produces adults capable of complex planning and memory retention. Older individuals, though physically less capable, could contribute knowledge accumulated across many environmental cycles. In climates marked by periodic drought or glacial advance, memory of previous patterns would have been invaluable. Children learning within such communities absorb not only immediate skills but also stories and experiences carried by elders. The prolonged need for care thus binds early and late life into a continuous exchange. Biological research suggests that the human brain remains plastic throughout life, though at reduced rates compared to childhood. This enduring adaptability may have supported the retention and transmission of cultural knowledge. Compared to species whose life expectancy limits generational overlap, humans created multi-layered populations in which care flows in multiple directions. A child depends on adults. Aging adults may depend on younger members. Adolescents transition between roles. This cyclical structure stabilizes communities. From an evolutionary standpoint, such arrangements likely increased group resilience. When environmental pressures intensified, cooperation across ages would buffer risk. The cost of supporting dependents at both ends of life was offset by shared labor and collective memory. Anthropological observations of contemporary foraging societies show similar dynamics. Food acquired by prime-age adults is often distributed widely within the group, supporting children and elders alike. This redistribution reflects long-standing patterns embedded deep in human history. Compared to animals that invest heavily in rapid reproduction and minimal post-reproductive life, humans exhibit what evolutionary theorists sometimes describe as a slow life history strategy. Growth, reproduction, and aging unfold gradually. Each phase overlaps with others, creating interdependence. The need for care becomes a thread running through the entire lifespan rather than a brief early chapter. Archaeological evidence of structured dwellings, burial practices, and material culture spanning generations suggests continuity of place and memory. Such continuity would not be sustainable without reliable caregiving systems. The question of why humans need more care than other animals, therefore, extends beyond infancy. It encompasses the entire temporal arc of the species. Dependence appears not as an isolated vulnerability, but as an organizing principle of social existence. The human body enters the world incomplete and often leaves it requiring assistance again. Between these points lies a long interval of shared responsibility. Compared to other animals, where independence is prioritized early and maintained until rapid decline, humans distribute vulnerability across time. This distribution may be the foundation upon which cooperation, culture, and long-term stability were built. The human pattern of extended care also altered how risk was distributed within early populations. In many animal species, survival depends heavily on immediate physical capability. A young animal that fails to mature quickly becomes an easy target. An adult that weakens loses its place rapidly. The system is efficient but unforgiving. Human communities evolve differently. By absorbing risk collectively, they reduce the pressure on any single individual to achieve full independence early. A child who stumbled did not necessarily perish. An injured adult could remain within the group. This redistribution of risk created a buffer that reshaped natural selection itself. Instead of favoring only those individuals who matured fastest, selection increasingly favored traits that enhanced cooperation, communication, and emotional responsiveness. Compared to other animals, where individual fitness is often closely tied to solitary strength or speed, human fitness became intertwined with group cohesion. Archaeological traces of structured campsites support this interpretation. Hearths appear as central points in many prehistoric living spaces, surrounded by tools and food remains. Such arrangements suggest planned gathering rather than scattered, solitary survival. Fire provided warmth for infants and elders, extended daylight for shared activity, and protection from predators. Maintaining fire required coordination and vigilance. The presence of a stable hearth indicates that care was embedded into environmental design. Compared to species whose young must adapt instantly to external conditions, humans modified those conditions to sustain development. Shelter construction follows similar logic. Evidence from early dwellings shows repeated use of protective structures, whether caves, windbreaks, or constructed huts. These spaces reduced exposure to climatic extremes, allowing fragile bodies to persist through seasons that might otherwise prove fatal. The long dependency of children becomes viable only when the environment is partially controlled. Human beings gradually transformed landscapes into supportive habitats, rather than relying solely on instinctual adaptation. Emotional systems evolved in parallel with these structural changes. Neurobiological research indicates that human brains are highly sensitive to social signals. Facial recognition, vocal tone interpretation, and empathy-related responses are pronounced. These capacities likely strengthen the bonds required to sustain prolonged care. Compared to many animals, whose offspring disperse and compete soon after maturation, humans form enduring social ties that extend across life stages. These ties reinforce caregiving beyond simple instinct. The evolutionary shift toward collective buffering may also explain the intensity of human attachment behaviors. Infants display prolonged crying patterns that draw attention persistently. Adults experience psychological distress when separated from close social partners. Such responses, while emotionally complex, function to maintain proximity and cooperation. In ancestral settings where survival depended on coordinated effort, maintaining group integrity was essential. The need for care thus influenced not only physical development, but also emotional architecture. Compared to animals whose care systems are shorter and more narrowly maternal, humans exhibit alloparental involvement care provided by individuals other than the biological parents. Ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherer groups show children interacting daily with multiple caregivers. This distributed care reduces individual burden and strengthens social networks. The slow development of humans fits within this broader cooperative matrix. Rather than racing toward independence, the species evolved toward interdependence. Vulnerability became sustainable because it was shared. The question of why humans need more care than other animals can therefore be reframed. It is not only about biological weakness, but about an evolutionary path that prioritized collective stability over rapid individual autonomy. In absorbing risk together, early humans created conditions in which prolonged growth and extended lifespan were possible. Compared to many other animals whose life histories emphasize speed and early self-sufficiency, humans invested in systems that made slow maturation survivable. Interdependence did not only reduce physical risk, it gradually reshaped how humans understood identity itself. In many animal species, the transition to adulthood is marked by separation. A young individual leaves the natal territory, establishes its own range, and competes independently. Human development rarely followed such a sharp boundary. Even when adolescents gained strength and skill, they remained embedded within kin networks and shared territories. The slow shift from dependence to contribution created a continuum rather than a break. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals clusters of related individuals interred within close proximity, sometimes across multiple generations. This spatial closeness suggests enduring social bonds that persisted beyond simple survival necessity. When children grew up surrounded by elders who had once cared for their parents, continuity became visible and tangible. The need for care thus influenced the perception of belonging. Compared to animals whose social ties dissolve once maturity is reached, humans maintained layered connections across age groups. These connections likely reinforced cooperative norms. If one expected to rely on others at the beginning and possibly at the end of life, preserving relationships carried long-term value. Emotional investment was not optional, but adaptive. Biological research into stress responses supports this interpretation. Human infants exhibit measurable physiological regulation when held or comforted by caregivers. Heart rate stabilizes, cortisol levels decrease, and neural activity synchronizes. These patterns indicate that the body anticipates social buffering. Such expectations persist into adulthood. Social isolation produces stress responses that affect immune function and longevity. Compared to other animals that achieve early independence and rely more heavily on instinctual survival strategies, humans appear biologically attuned to sustained social contact. The architecture of care becomes embedded not only in cultural practice, but in physiology. The extended childhood that demands supervision also allows moral systems to take root. Norms regarding sharing, fairness, and mutual aid cannot be transmitted instantaneously. They require years of observation and correction. Anthropological studies of small-scale societies show that children learn group expectations gradually through participation and storytelling. This long apprenticeship strengthens cohesion. In contrast, species with rapid maturation depend more heavily on inherited behavioral patterns. Humans depend on transmitted ones. The need for care therefore intersects with ethical formation. Without prolonged guidance, complex cooperative behavior would be unstable. Fossil evidence cannot record moral codes, yet the consistent presence of cooperative living structures implies enduring norms. Tools crafted to similar standards across wide regions suggest shared expectations and teaching networks. Such patterns reflect stable relationships over time. The requirement to protect dependent individuals may have reinforced rules that discouraged abandonment and promoted assistance. Over evolutionary history, these norms would increase group survival. The child who survived due to collective care later became an adult who upheld the same system. Compared to animals where maturity quickly erases the need for support, humans preserved the memory of vulnerability within their social fabric. Dependence was not erased at adulthood, it was remembered. The continuity between needing care and giving care creates a cycle that spans generations. This cycle stabilizes identity within the group. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus reaches into the foundations of social organization. The slow transition from helplessness to responsibility forged communities that viewed survival as shared work. Compared to species that prioritize swift independence, humans evolved toward durable bonds. The body's early fragility may have been the catalyst for a broader pattern, a species whose strength lies not in rapid self-sufficiency, but in sustained connection. If prolonged care shaped biology, population structure, and social identity, it also influenced how humans adapted to ecological instability. The environments in which early Homo sapiens lived were rarely stable for long. During the Pleistocene epoch, cycles of glaciation and warming repeatedly altered landscapes. Forests expanded and contracted. Grasslands shifted. Coastlines advanced and retreated. Animal migration routes changed across generations. In such fluctuating conditions, survival required flexibility not just within a single lifetime, but across multiple ones. The extended dependency of children provided a developmental window during which environmental knowledge could accumulate gradually. A short maturation period would compress learning into a narrow span, limiting exposure to variation. By contrast, a long childhood allowed observation of seasonal cycles repeatedly before full responsibility was assumed. Archaeological evidence supports this long apprenticeship. Sites dated to different climatic phases show continuity in occupation, suggesting that groups adapted behaviors rather than abandoning territories entirely. Toolkits evolved in response to new prey species or plant availability, yet certain core techniques persisted. This balance between stability and innovation implies structured learning environments. Children growing within these communities would have internalized not only immediate survival skills, but also strategies for responding to change. Compared to many animal species whose behavioral repertoires are largely fixed and whose young mature quickly to replicate those patterns, humans maintain developmental openness for extended periods. This openness is visible in the human brain's prolonged plasticity. Neural circuits involved in language, spatial reasoning, and social understanding continue to refine through adolescence. Such extended plasticity enables adaptation to complex and shifting contexts. It also demands protection. A child engaged in long-term learning cannot simultaneously perform at full adult efficiency. The need for care thus intersects directly with ecological unpredictability. By buffering the young during their slow development, communities increase the likelihood that they would emerge with the cognitive flexibility necessary for survival in uncertain climates. Fossil pollen records and isotopic analysis of ancient bones indicate dietary shifts over time. Early humans did not rely exclusively on a single food source. They diversified as environments changed. This diversification required experimentation and memory. A long developmental period allowed children to witness these adjustments across years. Compared to animals whose lifespans are shorter and whose feeding behaviors are more specialized, humans adopted a generalist strategy supported by learning. The extended period of care sustained this strategy by providing time for error correction under supervision. Mistakes made by juveniles did not immediately result in fatal outcomes when adults intervened. The landscape itself became a classroom rather than a battlefield. Spatial organization within settlements further reflects ecological adaptation. Some prehistoric sites show evidence of structured activity areas, zones for tool production, food processing, and sleeping. Such organization implies foresight and division of labor. Children growing within these structured spaces learn not only practical tasks but also spatial coordination. Compared to animals whose young often disperse into broader territories shortly after maturity, humans refined competence within protected hubs before venturing outward. This staging reduced exposure to extreme risk during early learning phases. Environmental instability likely amplified the value of multi-generational knowledge. Elders who had experienced prior climatic fluctuations could advise on migration timing or resource scarcity. The presence of such individuals, supported through extended caregiving systems, reinforced continuity. The slow maturation of youth paired with the longevity of elders created overlapping memory fields. Compared to species where generational turnover is rapid, humans accumulated ecological understanding across decades. The need for care thus becomes inseparable from adaptation to deep time. Prolonged dependency allowed each generation to integrate the experiences of the previous one before acting independently. Rather than a weakness, this slow development functioned as a stabilizing mechanism in volatile environments. Human vulnerability at birth and prolonged childhood were sustained because they contributed to long-term ecological resilience. Environmental instability did not only demand flexibility in behavior, it also required emotional regulation and long-term coordination, capacities that mature gradually within the protected span of childhood. In fluctuating climates, scarcity and abundance alternated unpredictably. Groups that responded with panic or fragmentation would struggle to endure repeated stress. The slow development of the human nervous system may have contributed to more measured responses over time. The prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and planning, continues refining well beyond early adolescence. This delayed maturation is costly in the short term, as children and teenagers are less consistent in judgment. Yet the extended learning period allows repeated exposure to social correction. Within multi-generational groups, younger members observe how elders respond to drought, migration shifts, or conflict. Emotional patterns are modeled and internalized gradually. Compared to many animals whose stress responses are immediate and heavily instinct-driven, humans cultivate responses shaped by narrative and memory. Archaeological evidence of repeated settlement patterns suggests that certain locations held symbolic meaning beyond immediate resource value. The return to familiar sites, even when alternative areas were available, implies attachment. Such attachment strengthens cohesion during hardship. Children raised within these cycles would associate place with safety and shared history. This association cannot be formed quickly. It requires time embedded in stable relationships. The need for care extends into the cultivation of belonging. Compared to species whose territories are defended primarily by strength or dominance displays, humans layered emotional significance onto landscape. This layering likely reduced internal fragmentation during ecological stress. When survival depended on cooperation across unpredictable conditions, maintaining trust became critical. Trust develops slowly. Infants learn reliability through consistent caregiving. Adolescents test boundaries and receive guidance. Over years, individuals internalize expectations of reciprocity. In early human groups, such internalization would support coordinated action during migration or scarcity. Fossil evidence indicating care for injured individuals suggests that assistance was not withdrawn when productivity declined. This pattern reinforces the idea that commitment extended beyond immediate utility. A group accustomed to sustaining dependence in childhood and old age would be more likely to persist through temporary shortages. Compared to animals where weakened members are often excluded or left behind, humans integrated vulnerability into their structure. The extended period of care therefore fostered emotional systems that valued continuity. Communication further reinforced coordination. Language allows abstract discussion of future plans and hypothetical scenarios. Its development over long childhoods enabled humans to prepare for events not yet occurring. Compared to animals that rely primarily on immediate cues, humans could share warnings about distant threats or discuss seasonal timing. Such capacities require prolonged instruction and immersion. The slow pace of maturation provided space for these skills to solidify. Environmental unpredictability thus interacted with developmental timing. The child growing slowly within a stable social matrix became an adult capable of planning beyond immediate horizons. Compared to other animals whose rapid maturation aligns with shorter lifespans and fixed behavioral repertoires, humans invested in delayed competence paired with extended memory. The need for care emerges as a foundation for emotional stability under shifting conditions. It allowed the species to transform volatile landscapes into navigable patterns across time. Vulnerability at birth and prolonged dependency during youth created individuals attuned to collective resilience. Over long stretches of evolutionary time, the combination of slow development and environmental instability produced something subtle but powerful. A species oriented not only toward survival, but toward anticipation. Many animals respond primarily to present stimuli. A change in temperature, a scent of predator, or the immediate availability of food triggers instinctive action. Humans certainly retain such reflexes, yet the prolonged childhood supported the growth of a different capacity, the ability to imagine futures that have not yet arrived. This capacity does not emerge fully formed. It is cultivated through years of guided participation in communal life. A child observing seasonal migration patterns, listening to stories about distant winters, or watching adults prepare tools in advance of need gradually internalizes the concept of deferred action. Compared to animals whose rapid maturation emphasizes immediate competence, humans develop slowly enough to absorb patterns extending beyond their own limited experience. Archaeological findings of stored food remnants and preserved tools in certain prehistoric sites suggest preparation that anticipates scarcity. Storage implies foresight. Foresight requires memory and projection, both of which mature over extended developmental windows. The long need for care makes such windows possible. While protected from direct exposure to extreme risk, children can learn the reasoning behind precautionary behaviors. The presence of elders who recall prior cycles reinforces this anticipatory mindset. Compared to species with short generational turnover, humans accumulated layered memories that shaped forward-looking strategies. Environmental pressures during glacial maxima would have demanded such strategies. Sudden cooling or resource depletion could threaten entire groups. Those able to coordinate migration or ration resources through collective planning would be more likely to endure. Planning depends on communication and shared trust, both of which are cultivated through prolonged socialization. The extended period of dependency thus becomes an incubator for collective imagination. It allows individuals to practice scenarios within safe boundaries before confronting them independently. The human brain's extended plasticity supports this process. Neural networks responsible for abstract reasoning strengthen gradually through adolescence. Impulse control and delayed gratification are refined over years of feedback. Compared to many animals that must achieve full survival competence quickly, humans invest heavily in shaping judgment. This investment delays independence but enhances coordination. The slow path to autonomy may have been advantageous in landscapes where immediate reaction alone was insufficient. Anticipation also shapes social bonds. When individuals expect to remain within the same group for decades, future interactions matter. Reputation becomes significant. Cooperation yields long-term benefits. Such dynamics are less relevant in species where dispersal is rapid and encounters are brief. Human children, remaining within stable networks, learn the consequences of actions across time. The need for care ensures sustained exposure to these lessons. Burial practices that show consistent patterns across generations further suggest awareness of continuity. Honoring the dead implies recognition of temporal depth. Such recognition requires imagination extending beyond immediate survival. Compared to animals whose life cycles emphasize speed and repetition, humans integrated memory and projection into daily practice. The vulnerability of early life created a developmental field in which anticipation could flourish. Care protected the immature brain while it built frameworks for thinking ahead. In volatile environments, this capacity to envision and prepare may have offset the risks associated with prolonged dependency. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus intersects with the emergence of foresight itself. Slow growth under communal protection fostered minds capable of navigating uncertainty not only by reacting, but by planning across seasons and generations. If the prolonged need for care shaped anticipation and ecological resilience, it also influenced the evolution of cooperation at a scale rarely seen among other mammals. Cooperation in many species exists, yet it is often limited to small units such as mating pairs or immediate kin. In humans, cooperation extends beyond narrow genetic ties and persists across large, flexible groups. The extended dependency of children likely intensified the need for such broad alliances. Raising a slow-developing child in unpredictable environments required more than the strength of one or two adults. It required shared labor, coordinated movement, and trust that assistance would be reciprocated over time. Archaeological traces of large aggregation sites indicate that early human populations sometimes gathered seasonally in numbers exceeding the size of small family units. Such gatherings would facilitate exchange of knowledge, mates, and resources. Children raised within these gatherings experienced a wide network of social models. Compared to many animals whose young primarily learn from a single caregiver, human children absorb behaviors from multiple adults. This diversity increases social flexibility. The slow pace of maturation provides time to internalize norms across a broad community rather than only within a narrow household. Biological evidence supports this cooperative expansion. Human infants are unusually responsive to eye contact and vocal tone. Within months of birth, they track gaze and react to emotional expression. These sensitivities foster shared attention, a prerequisite for collective action. The long period of care amplifies these tendencies. Repeated exposure to cooperative interactions reinforces neural pathways associated with empathy and coordination. Compared to species whose offspring mature quickly and compete soon after weaning, humans cultivate collaboration during an extended developmental window. Fossil evidence of shared tool-making techniques across distant regions implies networks of communication beyond immediate kin groups. Such standardization would be difficult without cooperative teaching structures. The need to sustain children over years likely strengthened incentives to maintain peaceful exchanges with neighboring groups. Conflict that disrupted caregiving networks would threaten offspring survival. Therefore, prolonged dependency may have indirectly favored strategies of alliance building and negotiation. From an energetic perspective, cooperative foraging allows distribution of unpredictable returns. Large game hunting yields variable success. Sharing meat within a group reduces individual risk. Children, who contribute little to hunting during early years, benefit from such redistribution. In turn, adults who were once recipients of care participate in the same system. Compared to animals where food sharing is minimal or limited to close kin, humans institutionalized it as a regular practice. This practice aligns with what evolutionary biologists describe as reciprocal altruism extended across time. The slow maturation of youth strengthens this pattern because individuals remain in proximity long enough to observe and remember acts of generosity or withholding. The development of social reputation depends on duration. A short juvenile phase would not provide sufficient time to build trust. Cooperation also reduces the cost of vulnerability. A child protected by multiple caregivers is less susceptible to orphanhood or sudden loss. The survival advantage of distributed care may have been substantial in environments marked by disease or injury. Archaeological remains showing survival after trauma imply sustained assistance. Compared to species whose offspring face immediate fatal consequences when caregivers disappear, humans buffered this risk through collective support. The need for care therefore radiates outward, reinforcing cooperation at every level. What begins as biological helplessness evolves into a framework for shared survival. Compared to other animals whose life histories emphasize early autonomy and narrow cooperation, humans extended interdependence across years and across individuals. The slow unfolding of childhood became the foundation for social systems capable of sustaining complexity and scale. Cooperation on a large scale also required regulation. When many individuals share resources and responsibilities over long periods, conflicts inevitably arise. The extended childhood of humans provided not only time to learn practical skills, but also time to internalize rules that make cooperation sustainable. In species where maturity is rapid and social structures are relatively simple, dominance hierarchies often resolve disputes quickly through physical assertion. Humans, by contrast, rely heavily on negotiated norms. These norms are not instinctive at birth. They are shaped gradually through correction, imitation, and reinforcement across years of guided interaction. A child growing within a cooperative group observes how disputes are settled, how resources are divided, and how status is recognized. The slow pace of development allows repeated exposure to these patterns before full autonomy is granted. Compared to animals whose young quickly enter competitive roles, humans cultivate restraint. This restraint is supported by the gradual maturation of brain regions involved in impulse control. Adolescents often test boundaries, yet they remain embedded in communities that provide feedback. Over time, this feedback refines judgment. Archaeological findings suggest that early human groups maintained relatively stable internal organization. The presence of shared hearths and communal activity zones implies coordination rather than constant fragmentation. Such coordination would require accepted rules. The extended need for care strengthens adherence to these rules because children depend on the group for survival. Violating norms carries risk not only to the individual, but to the support network. The awareness of mutual reliance becomes part of socialization. Compared to species where offspring disperse rapidly and have limited long-term ties, humans invest in reputation within enduring communities. Reputation gains meaning when interactions span decades. The long developmental period ensures that individuals grow up under the observation of many eyes. This continuity encourages conformity to cooperative standards. Emotional capacities such as guilt, shame, and empathy likely evolved in this context. These emotions regulate behavior internally rather than through constant external enforcement. Research in evolutionary psychology suggests that such internal regulators are adaptive in societies where repeated interaction is the norm. The need for care, extending through childhood, provides the environment in which these regulators are cultivated. Biological vulnerability thus intersects with moral architecture. Food-sharing patterns observed in contemporary foraging societies illustrate how norms structure cooperation. Even when hunting success varies, meat is distributed according to established expectations. Children witness this redistribution repeatedly, learning fairness through observation rather than instruction alone. Compared to animals whose sharing is minimal or opportunistic, humans institutionalize it. The slow path to independence gives space for these institutions to embed deeply. Conflict resolution mechanisms likely developed in tandem. Anthropological studies of small-scale societies show reliance on mediation, storytelling, and collective discussion rather than immediate violence. Such methods depend on communication skills refined over years. A short childhood would not provide sufficient time to master nuanced dialogue. The extended dependency phase allows language and persuasion to mature before individuals assume full responsibility. The human difference lies not only in needing care, but in building systems that make care sustainable across large groups. Compared to other animals, whose cooperative efforts are often limited and immediate, humans integrated rule-making into their developmental process. The long childhood became a training ground for maintaining cohesion without constant coercion. Care created interdependence. Regulation preserved it. Together, they formed the backbone of societies capable of enduring beyond the lifespan of any single individual. The cooperative systems that grew around prolonged childhood did more than stabilize resource sharing or regulate conflict. They gradually expanded the scale at which humans could organize themselves. Most mammals coordinate in small groups limited by immediate recognition and kinship bonds. Human groups, shaped by long developmental periods and sustained caregiving networks, develop the capacity to recognize and trust individuals beyond direct family lines. This expansion did not happen instantly. It emerged from repeated exposure to shared rituals, language, and collective memory over years of guided participation. A child growing slowly within such a system encountered symbols, patterns on tools, repeated stories, shared gestures that signaled belonging. These symbols created cohesion beyond biological relatedness. Compared to other animals, whose alliances often depend on proximity or dominance, humans layered meaning onto interaction. The slow pace of maturation allowed these meanings to take root deeply before individuals assumed independent roles. Archaeological evidence of widespread stylistic similarities in tools and ornaments across distant regions suggests that human groups maintained connections over broad territories. Such connections would require trust mechanisms extending beyond immediate contact. Prolonged caregiving likely contributed to this development. When children are raised within communities that emphasize reciprocity and shared identity, they internalize expectations of cooperation even with unfamiliar individuals who display recognizable cultural markers. The extended learning window supports the transmission of these markers. From a biological perspective, prolonged dependency reinforces social sensitivity. Infants are attuned to facial expression and vocal tone. Adolescents refine their understanding of subtle social cues. This sensitivity facilitates coordination in larger assemblies. Compared to species with rapid maturation, where survival behaviors dominate attention, humans invest heavily in social perception. The energy devoted to reading intentions and maintaining alliances reflects the importance of long-term cooperation. Extended childhood provides the protected environment in which these skills can mature without immediate life or death consequences. As group size increased, structured roles likely became more defined. Archaeological remains showing differentiated activity areas and specialized tools suggest division of labor. Children observing adults across many seasons would gradually discern these roles. They would learn not only how to perform tasks, but how tasks fit within a broader network of responsibilities. Compared to animals where role differentiation is often genetically fixed or limited to simple hierarchies, humans developed flexible systems adaptable to environmental change. The prolonged need for care ensured that individuals entered adulthood already integrated into these systems. Ritual practices may have reinforced cohesion at larger scales. Evidence of shared burial customs, decorative objects, and consistent artistic motifs implies collective identity extending beyond immediate utility. Participation in such practices requires years of exposure and gradual understanding. A short developmental phase would leave little room for the internalization of complex symbolic systems. By contrast, the slow maturation of humans allowed cultural identity to embed deeply. The need for care thus becomes inseparable from the growth of collective imagination. Large cooperative networks are fragile without shared meaning. Prolonged childhood nurtured that meaning through storytelling, imitation, and repeated communal experience. Compared to other animals whose social structures rarely exceed modest size, Humans expanded their cooperative reach through extended developmental investment. Care supported not only individual survival, but the construction of networks capable of spanning generations and landscapes. As cooperative networks expanded, the prolonged need for care began to influence not only social structure but also the pace of innovation. Many animal species display remarkable instinctive abilities, yet their tool use and problem-solving strategies often remain stable across generations. Human societies, shaped by extended childhood and intergenerational teaching, developed cumulative culture, the gradual layering of improvements over time. Cumulative culture depends on two conditions: the capacity to learn from others and sufficient time to refine what has been learned. The long dependency of human children satisfies both. A child does not simply copy a tool-making gesture once and move on. Years of observation allow subtle variations to be noticed, practiced, and adjusted. Archaeological records of stone tool assemblages demonstrate incremental refinements across thousands of years. Edges become sharper, symmetry more consistent, production methods more efficient. These changes rarely appear abruptly. They accumulate slowly, suggesting repeated instruction and evaluation. Compared to other animals whose juveniles achieve competence quickly and then replicate stable patterns, humans extend their learning phase long enough to support gradual improvement. The need for care protects this experimentation. A child practicing flint knapping under supervision can afford mistakes. In solitary conditions, such errors might carry fatal cost. Within a cooperative group, the cost is buffered. This buffering allows innovation to emerge without immediate penalty. Extended childhood also intersects with language development. Complex communication enables precise transmission of technique and abstract concepts. The neurological systems supporting syntax and symbolic reasoning mature over many years. Without prolonged care, these systems would not have the time required for refinement. Compared to species whose communication systems are largely fixed, humans invest heavily in verbal teaching. Words describe processes that cannot be demonstrated directly. Narratives encode lessons from past successes and failures. Such encoding expands the range of knowledge accessible to the young. Environmental variability during human evolution likely rewarded this flexibility. As landscapes shifted and prey species changed, static behaviors would prove insufficient. The slow development of youth allowed adaptation through guided trial and error. Children exposed to multiple strategies over extended periods could internalize alternative solutions. Compared to animals whose rapid maturation constrains behavioral plasticity, humans cultivated adaptability across decades. Evidence of symbolic artifacts, engraved ochre, carved figurines, patterned beads, suggests cognitive complexity intertwined with social learning. The production of such objects requires time not immediately tied to survival. The presence of these artifacts implies that communities supported individuals long enough to experiment with non-essential activities. Extended care makes such exploration possible. When basic needs are collectively secured, developmental time can include creative expression. Over generations, these expressions accumulate into cultural traditions. The link between care and innovation is therefore structural. Prolonged dependency ensures extended exposure to skilled adults. It allows repetition, correction, and gradual mastery. It also fosters curiosity under protection. Compared to many animals whose offspring must prioritize immediate self-sufficiency, humans created a developmental buffer that sustains experimentation. This buffer supports cumulative knowledge, which in turn strengthens survival under changing conditions. The question of why humans need more care than other animals intersects here with the emergence of technology itself. Without long childhoods embedded in cooperative systems, the layering of innovations across millennia would be unlikely. Care provides time. Time enables refinement. Refinement builds culture. The extended vulnerability of early life thus becomes a quiet engine of long-term advancement. Cumulative culture does not emerge automatically from intelligence alone. It requires stability across time, and stability depends on sustained caregiving systems. When knowledge is transmitted gradually from one generation to the next, there must be continuity in both teachers and learners. The prolonged dependency of human children ensures that this continuity exists. A child does not simply observe an adult once. Observation unfolds across seasons and years, Techniques are not memorized in isolation, but contextualized within stories of past failures and successes. Compared to animals whose juveniles reach competence quickly and then rely primarily on instinct, humans depend on layered instruction that deepens over extended developmental periods. Archaeological sequences reveal this layering clearly. In many regions, stone tool traditions persist with recognizable patterns for thousands of years, yet subtle improvements appear within those patterns. Such refinement implies patient repetition under guidance. Mistakes can be corrected because the young remain within reach of experienced individuals for long durations. The need for care creates a safe interval, during which trial and correction are possible. Innovation therefore unfolds incrementally rather than abruptly. The slow maturation of the human brain further supports this process. Neural plasticity during childhood allows adaptation to complex skill sets, whether tool production, navigation across varied terrain, or social negotiation. This plasticity decreases gradually with age, meaning that early life is uniquely suited to absorbing intricate practices. Without protection during this extended phase, the opportunity for mastery would shrink. Compared to species whose neural development stabilizes rapidly, humans extend the window of malleability. That extension demands caregiving systems capable of sustaining learning without immediate productivity. Environmental unpredictability likely reinforced the value of such systems. When prey animals migrated or plant resources fluctuated, communities that could modify techniques quickly would endure. The prolonged developmental phase allowed exposure to multiple strategies before independence. A child who witnessed adults adjust hunting patterns across several winters would internalize flexibility rather than rigidity. Compared to animals with more specialized feeding habits, humans benefited from adaptable toolkits and behavioral repertoires. Extended care supported the time necessary to integrate new methods into shared practice. Symbolic communication intensified this dynamic. Language not only conveys immediate instructions, but also preserves abstract concepts. Stories can encode ecological knowledge across generations. The long childhood provides years to internalize such narratives. Anthropological studies of contemporary foraging societies show that storytelling often occupies evenings around communal fires, where children listen repeatedly before understanding fully. This repetition strengthens memory. Compared to species whose communication systems are limited in abstraction, humans transmit cumulative lessons about landscapes, seasons, and social expectations. The need for care makes room for these slow transmissions. Artistic and ritual practices further illustrate the interplay between dependency and cultural depth. Decorative objects found in prehistoric contexts suggest sustained attention to symbolic meaning. Producing and interpreting such objects requires patience and guided learning. A rapid path to adulthood would limit exposure to complex symbolic systems. The extended developmental period allows gradual immersion. Compared to animals whose social signals remain primarily functional and immediate, humans cultivate layered meanings that bind groups together. Caregiving systems sustain the young while they navigate these layers. Over millennia, the accumulation of refinements in tools, language, and symbolic practice created expanding cultural complexity. This expansion is inseparable from the developmental architecture that supports it. The need for care extends the time horizon of each generation, allowing inherited knowledge to be modified rather than simply repeated. Compared to other animals whose life histories emphasize quick maturation and stable behavior patterns, humans invested heavily in prolonged learning. That investment required energy and cooperation, yet it yielded adaptability across varied environments. The slow pace of growth became a platform for cumulative knowledge. Care provided the protected interval within which ideas could take root and evolve. The accumulation of knowledge across generations also changed how humans related to error. In many animal species, a single serious mistake during early independence can end a life. A young predator misjudging distance or a grazing animal failing to detect danger may not receive a second opportunity. The rapid transition from immaturity to self-sufficiency leaves little room for extended correction. Humans followed a different path. The prolonged need for care created a developmental space in which error became part of learning rather than an immediate fatal endpoint. Within cooperative groups, a child experimenting with tool use or social negotiation could be corrected before consequences escalated. This tolerance for error may have been crucial for innovation. Archaeological sequences often show multiple discarded or imperfect artifacts within production sites, suggesting practice and repetition. Such traces imply that learning occurred in environments where failure was expected and managed. Compared to species whose juveniles must quickly reach adult efficiency, humans built systems that accommodate gradual improvement. This accommodation supports exploration. Exploration, in turn, expands behavioral flexibility. The slow maturation of executive functions in the human brain complements this pattern. Judgment, foresight, and impulse control strengthen over years. During this period, guidance shapes outcomes. The need for care ensures that immature decision-making does not immediately remove individuals from the population. Instead, feedback mechanisms operate repeatedly. Compared to animals whose developmental timelines compress learning into narrow windows, humans distribute it across long spans. Environmental instability would have amplified the value of this flexibility. When landscapes changed unpredictably, strict adherence to inherited routines could become maladaptive. Groups capable of revising practices through guided experimentation would be more resilient. The long childhood supports this revision process by allowing successive approximations rather than abrupt transitions. Children observe adults attempting new strategies. Adults adjust based on outcomes. Knowledge is refined collectively. Such iterative learning depends on extended proximity between experienced and inexperienced members. Care sustains that proximity. Social tolerance for error also influences emotional development. Human children gradually learn to interpret consequences not only through punishment but through explanation. Language enables clarification of why certain behaviors are harmful or beneficial. This interpretive layer requires time to internalize. Compared to animals whose behavioral regulation relies more heavily on instinct or immediate reinforcement, humans incorporate reasoning into correction. The long dependency phase allows the gradual shaping of conscience and self-monitoring. The presence of ritual and symbolic instruction further deepens this process. Repeated narratives about past mistakes or successes embed cautionary lessons into cultural memory. A short developmental period would not allow such narratives to resonate fully. Extended care ensures that children hear, question, and eventually integrate these accounts. Over evolutionary time, the capacity to treat error as information rather than catastrophe may have supported rapid cultural evolution. Mistakes become data points in collective learning. Compared to species where survival hinges on near-perfect early competence, humans accept imperfection during development. This acceptance is viable only because caregiving systems absorb immediate risk. The slow path to independence thus functions as a protective incubator for refinement. Innovation, moral reasoning, and adaptability all depend on environments where trial and correction can unfold gradually. The need for care sustains these environments. Rather than rushing towards self-sufficiency, humans evolved to cultivate competence through repetition under supervision. In this pattern, vulnerability becomes the condition that permits experimentation, and experimentation fuels cumulative change. As cumulative knowledge expanded and error became part of learning, another subtle shift emerged in human evolution: the deepening of emotional attachment beyond immediate survival necessity. In many animal species, parental care fades as offspring approach independence. Bonds loosen and individuals disperse. Humans, shaped by extended childhood, developed attachments that persist far longer. This persistence cannot be explained solely by instinctive maternal investment. It reflects a broader emotional architecture reinforced across years of close contact. The human infant's prolonged vulnerability strengthens bonding hormones such as oxytocin in caregivers, and repeated interactions consolidate these connections into long-term relational patterns. Compared to animals whose offspring mature quickly and sever close ties early, humans maintain emotional continuity across decades. Archaeological evidence suggests that such attachment was not limited to nuclear units. Burial sites containing multiple individuals arranged with care imply sustained recognition of relational ties even after death. The effort invested in burial rituals indicates that individuals were valued beyond immediate economic contribution. This valuation may stem from prolonged shared experiences during development. When childhood spans years, relationships accumulate depth. The memory of vulnerability strengthens commitment. Emotional continuity also shapes conflict resolution. Groups that remain closely bonded are less likely to fragment under stress. The need for care at early stages creates familiarity and empathy among group members. Children observing cooperative interactions internalize expectations of mutual support. Over time, these expectations become norms. Compared to species where dispersal reduces long-term familiarity, humans rely on enduring emotional networks. These networks reinforce cooperation even when short-term incentives fluctuate. The biological basis for such attachment is visible in the prolonged sensitivity of the human brain to social cues. Neural circuits involved in empathy and theory of mind continue maturing through adolescence. The extended period of caregiving ensures consistent stimulation of these circuits. Without long-term interaction, such refinement would be unlikely. Compared to animals with shorter developmental arcs, humans cultivate sophisticated social cognition that supports complex alliances. Attachment also influences reproductive strategies. Humans tend to form pair bonds of varying duration, often sustained through child-rearing years. While not universal or uniform across cultures, this pattern reflects the energetic demands of raising slow-maturing offspring. The extended need for care incentivizes stable partnerships and cooperative alliances. Compared to species where offspring mature rapidly and parental investment is brief, humans require sustained coordination between caregivers. This coordination deepens emotional ties. Environmental variability further reinforces attachment. In unpredictable climates, isolation increases vulnerability. Groups bound by strong emotional ties are more likely to share resources and protect dependents. The long childhood creates repeated opportunities for such bonding experiences. Children witness adults assisting one another during scarcity, reinforcing trust. Compared to animals whose social bonds may center primarily on dominance hierarchies, humans develop attachment patterns rooted in shared responsibility. The extended developmental period ensures that individuals enter adulthood already integrated into these emotional networks. Vulnerability at birth becomes the starting point for lifelong connection. The need for care, therefore, does not dissolve once competence is achieved. It leaves a lasting imprint on relational expectations. Compared to other animals whose life histories emphasize early independence and rapid dispersal, humans build enduring attachments that shape cooperation, identity, and resilience. The slow unfolding of childhood becomes the foundation for emotional depth across the lifespan. Emotional attachment shaped by prolonged childhood does more than strengthen individual bonds. It gradually alters how humans perceive obligation and responsibility across distance and time. In many animal species, care is tightly linked to immediate cues: hunger, proximity, vocal signals. Once those cues fade, so does the behavioral response. In humans, attachment extends beyond immediate sensory triggers. Adults often provide care in anticipation of future need rather than only in reaction to present distress. This anticipatory care may have roots in the extended dependency of offspring. When children require support for years, caregivers must think ahead, preparing food, shelter, and protection in advance. The habit of planning for another's future becomes ingrained. Compared to animals whose offspring achieve independence rapidly and whose care systems are brief, humans internalize long-term responsibility as part of social identity. Archaeological traces of structured dwellings suggest that early human groups built with durability in mind. Repeated occupation of sites implies investment in continuity. Such investment would not make sense if relationships were fleeting. Children growing slowly within these spaces would experience stability as a norm. Stability encourages trust that future needs will be met. That trust reinforces obligation. Compared to species where juveniles disperse shortly after maturity, humans remain embedded within kin networks for extended periods. This embedding allows obligations to accumulate across years. Biological systems support this pattern. Hormonal responses linked to caregiving do not vanish abruptly once infancy ends. Emotional sensitivity to kin often persists throughout adulthood. Neuroscientific research indicates that social pain, the distress associated with exclusion, activates brain regions overlapping with physical pain. Such sensitivity underscores the importance of maintaining bonds. The prolonged childhood may amplify this sensitivity by extending the formative window during which social connection is essential for survival. Compared to animals whose early independence reduces reliance on prolonged social approval, humans remain attuned to relational continuity. This attunement influences broader cooperation. When individuals perceive themselves as part of enduring networks, they are more likely to contribute to collective goods. The slow maturation process embeds individuals within shared narratives that extend backward to ancestors and forward to descendants. Burial practices and ritual objects reflect awareness of lineage. A child raised hearing stories of prior generations learns that actions resonate beyond the present. This sense of temporal obligation is rare among animals with short lifespans and minimal generational overlap. Environmental pressures likely reinforced such forward-looking responsibility. In fluctuating climates, neglecting communal infrastructure shelter, stored food, cooperative alliances could threaten offspring survival. The extended period of child dependency ensures that such infrastructure remains central to group priorities. Compared to animals that rely primarily on instinctive provisioning during short reproductive phases, humans sustain collective systems across decades. Emotional attachment and obligation intertwine. Individuals who once depended on care grow into adults who feel compelled to provide it. This cycle creates continuity not only of population, but of moral expectation. The need for care thus expands into an ethic of stewardship. It shapes how humans think about land, memory, and future generations. Compared to species whose young rapidly detach and pursue solitary survival, humans construct societies around long-term mutual reliance. The extended childhood that begins with helplessness becomes the training ground for enduring responsibility. The extended need for care also reshaped how humans experienced vulnerability in one another. In many animal species, visible weakness often signals imminent exclusion. A young animal that cannot keep pace risks abandonment. An injured adult may fall behind and disappear from the group. Humans followed a different path. The long developmental period required sustained attention to fragile bodies. Over time, this repeated exposure to dependency may have cultivated sensitivity to vulnerability beyond infancy. When children remain helpless for years, caregivers become accustomed to responding to subtle signs of need. That responsiveness does not vanish when children grow stronger. It becomes part of social reflex. Compared to animals whose caregiving phase is brief and narrowly focused, humans internalize patterns of attentiveness that extend into broader community life. Archaeological findings of individuals who survived serious impairments suggest that care was not withdrawn once productivity declined. Some skeletal remains display congenital conditions or traumatic injuries healed over long periods. Survival in such cases would require continuous support. The existence of these individuals indicates that communities tolerated and accommodated difference. This tolerance may trace back to the long apprenticeship of childhood, during which adults invest years before receiving direct economic return. When care is normalized as a long-term commitment, supporting non-productive members becomes less exceptional. Compared to species where rapid independence limits prolonged assistance, humans maintain space for recovery and adaptation. Emotional systems likely evolved alongside this pattern. Research into empathy suggests that humans are particularly attuned to the expressions of distress in others. Facial cues, vocal tones, and posture elicit rapid emotional resonance. The prolonged exposure to infants whose survival depends on broadcasting need may have strengthened neural pathways associated with compassion. These pathways, once established, extend to interactions among adults. Compared to animals whose distress signals function primarily in immediate contexts, humans integrate them into ongoing relationships. Vulnerability becomes a shared condition rather than an individual failure. The slow maturation of moral reasoning further reinforces this shift. Children learn gradually that strength and weakness fluctuate across a lifetime. Observing elders who once provided care and later receive it teaches continuity of roles. This cyclical awareness shapes expectations of mutual support. In many animal societies, aging individuals are marginalized once physical ability declines. In humans, older members often retain advisory roles, preserving dignity despite diminished strength. The extended childhood makes such role transitions conceivable. Dependence at the beginning of life normalizes dependence later. Environmental challenges would amplify the value of accommodating vulnerability. In unpredictable climates, injury or illness could affect anyone. Groups that support weakened members maintain higher overall resilience. The extended need for care during youth trains individuals in patience and collective response. Compared to species where immediate survival pressures discourage long-term accommodation, humans evolve toward tolerance embedded in social structure. Cultural practices further encode this tolerance. Rituals marking birth, illness, and death reinforce the recognition of vulnerability as a universal phase. Participation in such rituals requires years of immersion within communal life. A short developmental period would limit understanding of these transitions. The prolonged path from infancy to adulthood ensures repeated exposure to the full spectrum of human fragility. Compared to other animals, humans embed vulnerability into their conception of community. Care ceases to be an isolated act and becomes an organizing principle. The slow unfolding of childhood cultivates sensitivity that extends outward, shaping how societies treat those who falter. The need for care thus influences not only survival but the moral texture of human groups. If prolonged care shaped cooperation, emotional depth, and moral sensitivity, it also altered how humans relate to time within their own bodies. Most animals move quickly from dependence to physical peak, and then decline within relatively compressed spans. Humans unfold differently. Growth extends across many years. Adolescence introduces a second developmental surge, and adulthood may last decades before visible aging accelerates. This elongated timeline means that physical competence and social responsibility are staggered rather than synchronized. The need for care during youth delays full physical autonomy, yet it also delays reproductive timing compared to many mammals of similar body size. Skeletal studies indicate that early Homo sapiens reach reproductive maturity later than chimpanzees and many other primates. This delay is unusual from a strictly biological efficiency perspective. In species where mortality risk is high, rapid reproduction often increases genetic representation. Humans instead adopted a slower life history pattern. The extended period of dependency and growth means that individuals invest heavily in each offspring before producing the next. Compared to animals that produce large litters with minimal long-term care, humans space births widely. This spacing reduces maternal strain and increases survival rates per child, but it also requires sustained provisioning systems. Archaeological evidence of seasonal aggregation and structured settlement suggests that such systems existed long before agriculture. The slow pacing of life therefore predates modern civilization. It is embedded in the deep evolutionary history of the species. The human body itself reflects this pacing. Bone growth plates close later, dental eruption follows a prolonged schedule, and cognitive maturation continues into early adulthood. These biological markers reveal a life course designed around extended preparation. The need for care becomes a structural component of this design. During adolescence, for instance, individuals are physically capable of significant activity, yet often remain socially supervised. The brain's regulatory centers continue to refine impulse control and long-term planning. Compared to many animals whose reproductive capability aligns closely with full independence, humans separate these milestones. This separation allows for the consolidation of skills and social norms before parenting begins. Environmental unpredictability likely favored this slower rhythm. In volatile climates, premature reproduction without adequate skill acquisition could jeopardize offspring survival. The long childhood ensures that by the time individuals assume caregiving roles, they have internalized ecological knowledge and cooperative norms. Compared to species whose rapid generational turnover prioritizes speed, humans emphasize stability. The elongated timeline of development also influences perception of aging. Because early growth is slow and adulthood extended, decline appears gradual. This pattern creates overlapping phases of productivity across generations. Young adults learn from middle-aged individuals while elders continue to contribute knowledge. The need for care during youth and potentially again during late life forms a temporal arc connecting generations. Unlike animals whose life stages are tightly compressed, humans distribute dependency across a long continuum. The slow pace reduces volatility in population dynamics and supports cultural continuity. The question of why humans need more care than other animals intersects here with how the species experiences time itself. A prolonged childhood slows the entire life course. Care is not merely a response to weakness, but part of a broader evolutionary strategy emphasizing endurance over speed. Compared to other animals, humans extend growth, delay reproduction, and lengthen social apprenticeship. The need for care is therefore inseparable from the temporal architecture of human life. A slower life history does not only stretch childhood and delay reproduction, it also changes how energy is allocated within the body across decades. In many mammals, rapid growth is followed quickly by reproduction and then decline. Energy is directed toward early maturity because lifespan is limited. Humans distribute energy differently. Growth is prolonged, brain development consumes extraordinary metabolic resources during early years, and reproductive output remains relatively low compared to body size. This allocation reflects a strategic shift. Instead of maximizing the number of offspring in a short time, humans invest heavily in fewer individuals over longer spans. The need for extended care is central to this pattern. Human infants require constant nourishment, protection, and teaching. The brain alone consumes a disproportionately large share of the body's energy during childhood. Compared to other primates, the metabolic demands of the developing human brain are especially high. This energetic cost would be unsustainable without cooperative provisioning. Adults must gather surplus resources not only for themselves but for children who cannot yet contribute significantly. Archaeological evidence of coordinated hunting and food sharing supports this interpretation. Cut marks on animal bones and evidence of centralized food processing areas indicate communal distribution rather than isolated consumption. The prolonged dependency of children fits within this energetic framework. Energy invested in slow growth yields adults capable of complex planning and cooperation. The body's pacing ensures that reproduction occurs after extended skill acquisition. Compared to animals that reproduce soon after reaching minimal physical competence, humans delay until social integration is established. This delay reduces mortality among offspring and stabilizes group size. The spacing of births also affects maternal physiology. Extended lactation intervals observed in both prehistoric populations and contemporary foraging societies naturally lengthen the time between pregnancies. This biological rhythm aligns with the demands of raising slow-developing children. Compared to species with brief nursing periods and rapid weaning, humans sustain maternal investment across years. Environmental unpredictability further shape this energy strategy. In fluctuating climates, overproducing offspring without sufficient resources could endanger entire groups. By investing intensively in fewer children, humans reduced risk. The long period of care ensured that each child reached adulthood with accumulated knowledge and social bonds. This approach emphasizes survival quality over quantity. The body's metabolism reflects this emphasis. Research into human growth patterns shows that energy is partitioned across stages, with peaks during infancy and adolescence. These peaks correspond to periods requiring heightened support. Without caregiving systems capable of sustaining these metabolic surges, prolonged development would falter. Compared to animals whose growth spurts are brief and synchronized with early independence, humans extend high-cost phases over time. Cooperative networks absorb these costs. The distribution of energy across life stages also supports longevity. By slowing maturation and spacing reproduction, the species maintains overlapping generations capable of mutual assistance. The need for care thus integrates with the energetic economy of the body. It is not merely a social phenomenon, but a metabolic one. Compared to other animals, humans allocate resources toward extended learning and social integration before maximizing reproduction. This allocation shapes population stability and cultural continuity. The slow rhythm of growth, sustained by caregiving networks, becomes a defining characteristic of human evolution. The slow allocation of energy across the human lifespan also reshapes how strength and fragility alternate within a single body. In many animals, strength rises quickly and then declines almost as rapidly. The period of peak physical capacity is brief, aligned closely with reproductive urgency. Humans stretch this arc. The body spends years building neural connections, muscular coordination, and social competence before reaching full maturity. This elongated preparation means that physical strength is only one component of survival. Cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, and cooperative skill often matter as much as raw force. The need for care during youth ensures that these less visible capacities have time to mature. Compared to animals whose rapid growth emphasizes immediate muscular competence, humans invest heavily in coordination between body and brain. Skeletal analysis reveals that human bones thicken gradually under load during adolescence, reflecting years of incremental adaptation rather than abrupt transformation. This slow strengthening corresponds with extended supervision. Children do not immediately assume the most dangerous tasks. They observe, practice, and gradually increase responsibility. The developmental pace protects the body from catastrophic injury while it is still forming. Environmental variability reinforces this pattern. In unpredictable landscapes, a miscalculation during a hunt or migration could threaten survival. Gradual apprenticeship reduces such risk. The extended need for care allows bodily competence to emerge alongside judgment. Compared to animals whose juveniles must reach functional independence quickly or perish, humans create a staged ascent toward capability. This staging influences aging as well. Because growth is prolonged and reproduction delayed, decline often begins later relative to total lifespan. Human longevity allows decades of contribution beyond peak physical strength. The extended childhood indirectly supports this longevity by embedding individuals in cooperative networks that provide support when physical capacity wanes. Compared to species where decline swiftly ends participation in group life, humans remain integrated. The slow life history strategy thus produces overlapping phases in which individuals at different points along the arc contribute distinct forms of value. The energetic cost of maintaining such a system is high. A developing brain demands calories, prolonged socialization demands time. Elders require support. Yet these costs are distributed. Cooperative provisioning spreads energy burdens across the group. Archaeological findings of shared storage pits and evidence of seasonal planning suggest deliberate management of surplus. Such management would be unnecessary in species with rapid turnover and minimal extended dependency. The human body's slow pacing necessitates foresight. Foresight is learned during the protected years of childhood. The long developmental interval also supports integration of complex motor skills, tool use, navigation across varied terrain, and coordinated group movement require fine-tuned neural control. These skills refine gradually. Without sustained caregiving systems to buffer early errors, mastery would be unlikely. Compared to animals whose behavioral repertoires are largely fixed, humans depend on practice embedded within mentorship. The need for care becomes the bridge between biological potential and realized competence. This bridge extends across years, linking physical growth to cultural immersion. When viewed in this light, human fragility at birth appears less like weakness and more like a deliberate extension of development into social space. The body is unfinished not because it failed to evolve independence, but because evolution favored a design that completes itself in interaction. Compared to other animals whose life cycles emphasize speed and early autonomy, humans stretch growth across time, aligning bodily maturation with communal integration. The slow arc of strength and decline reflects a species that trades rapid self-sufficiency for layered capability sustained by care. As the slow rhythm of growth, cooperation, and energy allocation shaped human life, another consequence emerged: the blurring of the boundary between biological necessity and cultural expectation. In many animals, care ends when physical competence is achieved. Once the young can hunt, forage, or evade danger independently, parental involvement recedes. In humans, independence is rarely defined by physical ability alone. Cultural participation, understanding language, norms, and collective memory becomes equally essential. The prolonged need for care during youth gradually transforms into prolonged guidance. Biological dependence gives way to cultural apprenticeship. This transition is not abrupt. It unfolds across years during which physical strength may already be sufficient, yet social knowledge remains incomplete. Archaeological evidence of consistent tool styles across generations suggests that mastery required more than muscular coordination. It required alignment with shared standards. Children raised within these environments learn not only how to produce objects, but how to produce them in ways recognized by their community. Compared to other animals, whose learned behaviors often remain limited in scope and duration, Humans integrate cultural conformity into maturation. The need for care ensures that individuals remain within instructional networks long enough to internalize expectations deeply. Environmental variability would have amplified the importance of such alignment. In fluctuating landscapes, coordinated responses reduce confusion and conflict. If hunting strategies, migration timing, or resource distribution follow agreed patterns, survival chances increase. The extended developmental phase allows young members to observe these patterns repeatedly before assuming responsibility. Compared to species with rapid maturation, where individual initiative may dominate early, humans cultivate synchronization. Biological markers of adolescence reveal this prolonged transition. While secondary sexual characteristics appear, cognitive regulation and social judgment continue refining. This mismatch between physical capability and full social competence extends supervision beyond infancy. The need for care thus evolves into mentorship. Anthropological observations of small-scale societies show that adolescents often remain under guidance in ritual and subsistence activities, even when physically capable. Such prolonged oversight may reflect deep evolutionary roots. Compared to animals whose maturity coincides with immediate independence, humans stagger milestones deliberately. Cultural continuity depends on this staggering. Ritual practices further illustrate the merging of biology and culture. Initiation ceremonies mark transitions not at the moment of physical maturity, but at the point of recognized social readiness. These ceremonies embed individuals into communal identity. The long developmental period allows understanding of symbolic meaning before participation. Without extended care and instruction, such layered rites would lack coherence. The human difference lies in this blending of biological growth with cultural shaping. The body reaches strength, yet guidance persists. Compared to other animals, whose developmental endpoints are clearly defined by physical markers, humans define adulthood through shared recognition. The need for care expands into shared evaluation of readiness. This expansion reinforces cooperation and reduces abrupt fragmentation within groups. The extended youth phase allows errors to be corrected within supportive frameworks, rather than through exclusion. Over evolutionary time, this blending of necessity and expectation stabilized communities. Prolonged guidance ensured that each new generation did not merely survive, but integrated seamlessly into inherited structures. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus reaches beyond infancy and adolescence. It touches the way societies define maturity itself. Human development is not a simple ascent towards solitary autonomy. It is a gradual weaving into collective patterns sustained by years of shared attention. The blending of biological growth and cultural apprenticeship also reshaped how humans interpret autonomy itself. In many animal species, autonomy is a clear event. A juvenile leaves the protection of its parent and either survives or does not. The transition is visible and decisive. In humans, autonomy unfolds gradually and remains partially relational. Even after physical maturity, individuals continue to rely on shared systems, language, tools, collective memory that were acquired during prolonged care. Independence, therefore, does not mean isolation. It means participation within inherited structures. The long developmental phase ensures that by the time individuals act independently, their decisions are informed by years of embedded learning. Compared to animals whose independence centers primarily on physical competence, human autonomy is layered with cultural alignment. Archaeological evidence of consistent settlement patterns across generations suggests that mobility was often guided by tradition rather than purely individual exploration. Routes of migration, locations of water sources, and seasonal gathering sites were known collectively. A young adult stepping into leadership did so within established frameworks. The need for care during childhood created familiarity with these frameworks long before authority was assumed. Environmental unpredictability further required this layered autonomy. Acting alone in unstable conditions could be dangerous. Decisions about movement or resource use often demanded consensus. The extended period of guidance during youth cultivated habits of consultation. Compared to species where solitary decision-making dominates after early maturity, humans embed autonomy within negotiation. This relational independence likely enhanced group cohesion. The slow refinement of executive function in the brain supports such patterns. Planning and impulse control mature over extended years, reducing abrupt risk-taking in adulthood. Adolescents may test limits, yet they remain within corrective environments shaped by earlier caregiving. This prolonged feedback loop produces adults capable of balancing initiative with restraint. Compared to animals whose neural development stabilizes rapidly and whose independence aligns closely with immediate survival pressure, humans tolerate extended social scaffolding. The need for care thus transitions into shared governance. Cultural practices reflect this continuity. Storytelling traditions often emphasize lessons learned through collective experience rather than solitary triumph. Narratives of ancestors navigating hardship reinforce the value of communal wisdom. Children raised hearing such stories internalize a view of autonomy that includes responsibility to group continuity. Compared to species whose social learning is brief and limited in abstraction, humans cultivate identity through long immersion in shared narrative. The extended childhood that begins in physical helplessness evolves into a prolonged apprenticeship in belonging. Even economic roles reflect this gradual autonomy. In many traditional societies, individuals assume increasingly complex tasks step by step rather than abruptly. Mentorship continues into adulthood. The need for care morphs into mutual reliance. Compared to animals where adulthood sharply divides dependence from independence, humans maintain a spectrum. Biological maturity does not sever relational ties. It redefines them. This redefinition stabilizes communities across generations. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus intersects with how autonomy is conceptualized. The prolonged path to self-sufficiency ensures that independence remains connected to shared memory and obligation. Humans do not emerge from childhood as solitary actors, but as participants in long-standing networks. Care, extended across years, becomes the foundation upon which mature agency rests. The gradual shaping of autonomy through prolonged care also influences how humans experience separation and loss. In many animal species, separation is a predictable and relatively brief stage. Offspring disperse once capable, and social bonds weaken without prolonged psychological disruption. In humans, separation carries emotional weight that can persist long after physical distance is established. This depth of response may trace back to the extended dependency of childhood. When survival in early years depends entirely on sustained proximity, the brain forms strong associative links between safety and specific individuals. These associations do not dissolve quickly once physical competence is achieved. Compared to animals whose short caregiving windows limit long-term attachment, humans internalize bonds deeply. Archaeological evidence of grave goods and ritualized burial suggests that relationships were remembered beyond immediate presence. Care for the dead reflects enduring attachment. The prolonged years of shared growth likely amplify the sense of continuity even after loss. Environmental pressures may have reinforced the value of maintaining bonds despite dispersal. Migration, trade, and seasonal movement would sometimes separate groups temporarily. Individuals raised within strong caregiving systems would carry memory of relational stability into new contexts. Compared to species where dispersal often ends direct ties, humans preserve connections through narrative and symbol. This preservation stabilizes cooperation across distance. Emotional systems shaped by long childhoods also heighten sensitivity to abandonment. Infants display distress when caregivers depart, and this response gradually transforms rather than disappearing. Adults may experience similar responses to social exclusion. Such sensitivity encourages maintenance of group cohesion. Compared to animals whose independence reduces reliance on social affirmation, humans remain alert to relational fractures. This alertness can motivate reconciliation and sustained alliance. The extended path from helplessness to independence ensures that social bonds are not transient conveniences, but integral to identity. Cultural practices further institutionalize remembrance and reunion. Rituals marking return from migration or honoring ancestors reinforce continuity. Participation in such practices requires years of immersion during youth. The need for care ensures that individuals absorb these patterns before full adulthood. Compared to species with limited symbolic expression, humans encode attachment into shared ceremonies. The slow maturation process thus shapes not only cooperation, but also resilience in the face of separation. By embedding attachment deeply, Communities create frameworks for managing absence without dissolving identity. The long developmental period also influences how humans perceive obligation toward absent members. Support may extend to those temporarily away, whether through resource sharing or protective reputation. Such practices would be unlikely without durable relational foundations. Compared to animals whose bonds often rely on immediate presence, humans sustain connection through memory and expectation. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus reaches into the emotional landscape of separation itself. Extended childhood fosters attachments that persist beyond proximity, anchoring individuals within networks that endure across time and space. When viewed across the full arc of human evolution, the prolonged need for care appears less like a weakness and more like a structural commitment to interdependence. From birth, the human body arrives unfinished, neurologically open and physically fragile. This incompleteness demands years of protection, yet the same incompleteness allows experience to sculpt the brain in response to local environments. Compared to many animals whose offspring enter the world with more fixed behavioral programs, humans begin life as adaptive learners embedded in social space. The cost is vulnerability, the gain is flexibility. Archaeological evidence spanning hundreds of thousands of years reveals continuity in cooperative living arrangements, suggesting that this pattern was not incidental but foundational. The repeated appearance of shared hearths, communal work areas, and overlapping generations points to a life history structured around sustained caregiving. Environmental unpredictability during glacial cycles would have intensified reliance on such systems. Groups unable to buffer young dependents through harsh winters or drought would struggle to persist. The extended childhood created a window in which ecological knowledge could be transmitted gradually and revised collectively. Compared to animals that rely primarily on instinctual responses fine-tuned over evolutionary time, humans rely on cultural adjustment within a single generation. The long developmental period ensures exposure to diverse strategies before independence. Biological markers reinforce this interpretation. The slow maturation of the prefrontal cortex supports impulse control and long-term planning, traits advantageous in cooperative groups navigating fluctuating conditions. Without extended caregiving, this neural refinement would be truncated. The need for care thus shapes cognitive architecture directly. It also shapes population dynamics. Slower reproduction and longer life expectancy produce overlapping generations capable of sharing responsibility across time. Compared to species with rapid turnover, humans build continuity. The body's metabolic investment in prolonged growth aligns with this continuity. Energy is allocated toward brain development and social learning rather than early reproductive output. Cooperative provisioning distributes the burden. The emotional systems that arise from extended childhood further cement this arrangement. Deep attachment, empathy, and sensitivity to social exclusion reinforce bonds necessary for long-term collaboration. These emotional traits, cultivated over years of guided interaction, extend into adulthood and aging. Compared to animals whose independence reduces prolonged relational ties, humans sustain networks across decades. The moral frameworks that emerge from this arrangement emphasize reciprocity and care. Vulnerability becomes normalized, not exceptional. Archaeological traces of care for injured individuals and ritualized remembrance of the dead indicate that assistance extended beyond immediate utility. Such practices suggest that caregiving was woven into identity. The need for care at the beginning of life echoes later in the expectation of support during illness or decline. The human life course, elongated and interdependent, reflects a strategy prioritizing endurance over speed. Compared to animals that emphasize early autonomy and swift reproduction, humans stretch development across time, embedding learning, cooperation, and emotional depth within the slow unfolding of growth. The question of why humans need more care than other animals thus converges on a central insight. Prolonged dependency is not an evolutionary accident, but a deliberate trajectory shaped by ecological volatility, neurological expansion, and cooperative survival. The unfinished infant becomes the starting point for a species that completes itself through shared effort. If prolonged care is not an accident but a structural commitment, then it also reshapes how humans understand strength. In many species, strength is measured by early independence, by the ability to move, hunt, and reproduce without assistance. Human strength follows a quieter path. It begins in dependence and matures within relationship. The infant who cannot survive alone becomes the adult capable of sustaining others. This transformation depends on time. Years of guided learning, correction, and shared labor slowly convert fragility into contribution. Compared to animals whose survival strategies prioritize speed and immediate self-sufficiency, humans prioritize durability built through connection. Archaeological continuity across millennia suggests that this durability stabilized communities, even when climates shifted and resources fluctuated. The long childhood allowed each generation to inherit not only tools but also patterns of cooperation. Environmental volatility during the Ice Ages would have tested such systems repeatedly. Groups that invested in extended care created members capable of anticipating change rather than reacting blindly. The slow maturation of judgment, supported by prolonged social immersion, produced adults prepared to manage uncertainty. Biological evidence reinforces this trajectory. The human brain remains adaptable well into early adulthood, refining executive control and social cognition. These capacities require guidance. Without sustained caregiving networks, the developmental arc would fracture. The need for care thus underwrites cognitive resilience. It also sustains demographic balance. By spacing births and extending generational overlap, human populations avoid rapid collapse under stress. Compared to species whose rapid reproduction produces volatility, humans build continuity. This continuity rests on shared obligation. Emotional attachment formed in childhood evolves into responsibility in adulthood. The individual once protected becomes protector, maintaining the cycle. Cultural practices encode this exchange. Stories, rituals, and shared symbols remind members that vulnerability is universal and recurring. Compared to animals whose bonds are often transient beyond reproductive phases, humans integrate care into moral expectation. The slow life history strategy amplifies this integration. Growth, reproduction, and aging unfold gradually, encouraging long-term planning. The need for care shapes not only early survival but the architecture of meaning across life stages. Strength in this framework is relational rather than solitary. It is measured by the capacity to sustain and be sustained. Environmental unpredictability likely favored this relational strength. In landscapes where resources shifted and threats appeared without warning, isolated competence would falter. Coordinated groups anchored by deep attachment and extended apprenticeship endured. The prolonged dependency of childhood cultivated such coordination. Compared to other animals, humans redefined survival as collective continuity rather than individual speed. The body's initial fragility set this process in motion. Over generations, that fragility became the seed of resilience. To ask why humans need more care than other animals is to ask why humans evolved toward enduring connection. The answer unfolds across bones, brains, hearths, and memory. Care is not merely a response to weakness. It is the medium through which the species shaped its slow, too stable path through uncertain time. When we look back across this long arc, from the unfinished infant to the elder sustained by memory, a pattern becomes visible. Humans did not evolve toward independence as quickly as possible. They evolved toward connection as deeply as necessary. The newborn who cannot lift its head, the child who needs years of guidance, the adolescent whose judgment still matures, and the aging adult who may once again require assistance, all exist within a single design. That design distributes vulnerability across time rather than concentrating it at one fragile moment. Compared to many animals whose life cycles are compressed into swift independence and rapid turnover, humans stretch growth, responsibility, and decline across decades. The need for care is not confined to a phase. It is woven into the structure of the lifespan. Archaeological traces of shared hearths, cooperative hunting, structured dwellings, and careful burials reveal that this weaving began deep in prehistory. Environmental instability during glacial cycles would have tested early communities repeatedly. In such conditions, survival depended less on solitary strength and more on sustained coordination. The prolonged childhood created individuals who learned slowly but thoroughly. They absorbed not only techniques but patterns of mutual reliance. The slow maturation of the brain allowed executive control, empathy, and foresight to refine under supervision. Biological fragility became the opening through which culture entered. Energy invested in long development yielded adults capable of anticipating change rather than reacting blindly. Compared to species that rely primarily on instinct stabilized over evolutionary time, humans rely on shared learning stabilized within generations. The extended need for care thus enabled cumulative culture, emotional depth, and large-scale cooperation. It shaped demographic patterns, delayed reproduction, and fostered overlapping generations. It encouraged responsibility that extends forward to descendants and backward to ancestors. Strength emerged not from early autonomy, but from durable interdependence. This does not mean humans are uniquely gentle or free of conflict. It means that our survival strategy assumes repeated reliance. The infant expects to be held, the adolescent expects guidance, the elder expects recognition. These expectations are not modern inventions. They echo through skeletal remains and settlement patterns tens of thousands of years old. Compared to other animals, the difference is not simply that humans require more care. The difference is that humans built entire social worlds around that requirement. Care became infrastructure. It shaped space, time, memory, and meaning. When vulnerability is prolonged, societies must respond or disappear. Early humans responded by organizing themselves in ways that made slow growth survivable. Over generations, that organization became tradition, then culture, then identity. The question of why humans need more care than other animals, therefore, carries a quiet answer. Because our evolutionary path favored endurance through relationship. We traded speed for stability, instinct for instruction, solitary strength for shared resilience. In doing so, we became a species whose very beginning is unfinished, trusting that others will complete what biology begins. And perhaps the deeper question is not why we needed more care, but what kind of world we would become if we ever forgot that we were shaped by it.